Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Time Crunch Office Hours with TI. I am your host, Curtis Brown. I'm here with Jennifer Waters and Randy Munch. Today we're going to be checking out some calculator tips for AP statistics, and I'm super excited to have these guys here. Before we get started, I want to say kind of the same thing I do each time, that I'm sad we're in this situation. I'm sorry we're having to do this in this way. I know it's tough. Teachers especially, I know that it's very difficult to manage both your own families at home and the learning that you have to do with your kids, but also manage the students that you have virtually, especially since you miss them so much. I know that's a big deal. And so I really appreciate your hard work and the things that you guys are doing. We're here to try to help you guys as much as we possibly can. And so that's why we're doing these things. So glad we can do that. So let's go ahead and get started. Jen, why don't you take it away?
Actually, I'm going to take it away.
Oh,
yes, we're going to start
Randy,
with Randy.
You guys messed me up there. Randy, go for it.
Gotcha.
So I'm going to share my screen here.
All right.
Am I sharing?
I see your screen.
Alrighty then. So I'm going to start out with the 84, just a couple of tips and tricks, if I can speak. This is about as well as it goes in my classroom too. So I have already put in some data to look at. So the first thing that I want to point out is, for those of you kids who are about to take the AP test, clear out all your data, because you don't want to have to be worrying about, oh no, I have things in 3 lists, but I need to put in new data for the test. So the first thing I would do if I were you is clear out your data so that you don't have anything in your way. So all of my data is pre-put in for this. So the first thing I want to look at is a box plot so that we can explore one variable statistics. And so in order to get to a box plot, we have a couple buttons that we're going to cycle through. The first button right here is this stats button. And then the stat plot are going to be our friends. And of course, when we look at the visualizations, we're going to be using the graph and the zoom. Just a couple features of this window for those of you who are working for the first time on the emulator software. One of the really nice things is that you can adjust this screen so that you can make your viewing window as big or as small as you want, and you can make your calculator as big or as small as you want. Another tip that I would give for the kids who are taking this is I would take a screenshot of the keypad, because I'm somebody who forgets where buttons are all the time, especially when I'm in a time crunch like the test. I would screenshot that and copy it to a piece of paper and make little notes to yourself about where buttons are, or if you want to do a box plot, where's that going to go, so that during the time crunch of the test where you're worried about, you got your 25 minutes, well, how am I going to do on stats? You're not worried about what do I need from the calculator. You have it written down there. So those are some nice features of the interface. The other thing at the bottom you'll notice is I've got a key press history, and it's blank because I haven't pressed anything. But if you want to help yourself remember those keys visually, you can copy and paste the keys that show up here. And that's a nice helpful tip as you're organizing your notes for exam day. So let's look at a box plot. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to stats, because that's where we build box plots. And in my stat edit, I'm going to push number 1. And one of the things that I always forget, because I work on both the Nspire and the 84, is the 84, you have to push these buttons. On the Nspire, you've got the nice keyboard feature, but this, you got to push the buttons. So I have 4 lists in here. As I was saying before, one of the things before you get to that test is you want to clear out all your data so you don't have anything kind of in the way. So to clear out a list, you're going to go all the way up to the top, and you're going to push clear. And the most important button, the one that I forget the most, is to hit enter so that you actually clear the list, because I've forgotten that more times than I can count. So I've got something in list 1. We're going to go with list 3 and 4 a little bit later, but for now we're going to do a box plot with list 1. And I want to point out that I've been told anything less than 10 data points makes an ugly box plot, but we love all box plots. They're all beautiful in my eyes. So from here, I want to plot this. And so I need to make sure that my other plots are cleared. They're not going to get in the way. So I'm going to go to my y equals button, and notice that I have 2 things. And you have 2 options when you're clearing this. You can either push clear, and you'll notice that it completely goes away, or you can go to this equal sign if for some reason you want to hold on to that, and you can hit enter, the most useful, most forgotten button. And you'll see that this equal sign is no longer on. So if you had something you wanted to keep, but you just don't want to see it, you can turn it off as well as deleting like we did in Y1. The next thing that you want to make sure you do, and this is another prep for the day of, you want to make sure that your graph is set to go. So in the display, which we're going to go to second format, we want to make sure of a couple things. First of all, we want to make sure the coordinates are on, and you want to make sure that the grid is off. So this is one of those things that you can set up before test day so you don't have to worry about it. And from here, I want to plot this now that I know that I have all my stuff set up. And so I'm going to go to Scatterplot, which is in blue. So I'm going to go second y equals, and I would like to put this in plot 1. So I'm going to hit enter. And right now my plot is set as a scatter plot. So I'm going to use these arrows to go over here to a box plot that shows the outliers. I don't want list 3 and list 4. Whoops. Notice I forgot to say enter because I didn't hit it. So I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to hit enter. I'm modeling, kids, I'm modeling. So down here in X list 1, I don't want L3, I want L1. And to get rid of L3, we're going to go second, the button number 1 to get L1. If your frequency isn't 1, go ahead and change it to 1. I'm a fan of these boxes for the outliers. You can pick your preference. And then let's go with blue. It's a nice calming color. So once we have that set up, now we want to display it. So I could go to graph, but whatever screen I left there is going to be what I graph at. So I want to make sure that I'm setting up the viewing window for that box plot. So instead of going to graph, I'm going to go to zoom, and I want to zoom stat so I can see a very nice window with that box plot. And you can either use the arrows to scroll down, or you can push number 9. And there's my beautiful box plot. It doesn't have any numbers on it. If we want to see the numbers, and this is one of the things that I always forget. I always look at it and I go, well, that it doesn't help me. Where are the numbers? And so for me, this would be something that I write down on my little helpful sheet. If I push trace, now I'm going to get where those numbers are. And now I'm going to get my min, my max, my quarter 3, my quarter 4, my median. Sorry, my quarter 1, my quarter 3. How embarrassing. And so that's pretty much what you want to do for a box plot. Now I'm going to scoot over to 2 variable data. So I'm going to go back to my stats. And in my edit, you'll notice that in list 3 and list 4, I have a lot of data because these are the 2 variables that I'm going to compare. One of the mistakes that I always make, especially in front of a bunch of teenagers in a time crunch situation like teaching during period 3, is sometimes I make mistakes on the amount of items in my list, especially on something that's long. So I always make sure that I go up to the bottom and that I check that both of my lists have the same number of elements. And I'll even kind of go through and do a spot check to make sure that, oh, 4.7 was the data point that went with 73, so that all of my data is good to go. From there, we've got a couple things that we have to set up in order to get that scatter plot that we want. So we want to make sure that when we go to second stat plot, first we actually tell it to plot what we want. So I'm going to go to that enter button again. And I do not want a box plot anymore. Now I want that scatter plot. So I'm going to hit enter this time. And you'll notice now, because it's 2 variable data in a scatter plot, it's asking me for 2 lists. Well, list 4 I'm happy with, but I want to change that list 1. So I'm going to go ahead and make that list 3. Now we have to turn a couple things on. And this is another one of those, if you do it beforehand, you're going to save yourself a lot of time. And so I'm going to go to the mode menu and make sure that if I want to do some statistics, that I have those stat diagnostics on. I teach calculus and I teach physics. And one of the things that I always have to go back and forth is between radians and degrees. And so I always make sure that before we take a test, my calc kids are in radians or my physics kids are in degrees. This is one of those things that before you get on that test, set those up and you'll save yourself a lot of time. So now that we've got the diagnostics on, now we actually want to do those computations. So in the stat button, I want to calculate some things. And depending on what you're asked, you might go to a different spot. I'm going to go to number 8, linear regression. And I'm going to push 8. I want my X list as L3, my Y list as L4. And now I have to go down to where am I going to store it? You choose where you want to store it. This is one of those things that I always forget, so I have to have written down. If I want those Y variables, if you push second, Y equals, nope. I'm going to go to stat. I'm going to go to calc. I'm going to go to 8. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to go to alpha Y equals. This is why it's helpful to have things written down, because things like that happen. And if you have it written down and you can reference it, you just breathe past it. So I want to store it in Y1. So I'm going to hit enter. And then we're going to go down here and calculate. If this is something that you know you struggle with, write down the steps. So I brought up the keypad. Down here is all the steps that I've taken. You can copy and paste those into a document so that you have those and you're not struggling like I just did on test day. The last two things that I just want to show you, they exist, and then I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Waters, are a couple of things for probability and some simulations. So if I go to math, and over here to probability. And one of my kids one time asked me, is that where the calculator solves problems? And I said, probably. And I got a good laugh and he just kind of stared at me. So any probability you want to do is mathematical. So in the math key, we're going to go to probability. The other thing that we're going to look at is simulations. So in the apps, it's real sneaky. If you go up to 0, there's your probability simulations. And so knowing where these things are in advance is going to save you a lot of time on the day of the test. And I think that's it for me.
Hey, Randy.
Yo.
Got a question for you. A couple of things actually came up in the middle of, and I know Jen's going to tackle one of these here in just a second, so I'll let her do that. But first off, I want to ask you if quickly, you can show a demonstration of how to use the random number generator, maybe random integer or something that way. You good with that?
Yes, she is, because I'm going to walk her through it. Are you ready, Miss Munch?
Yes, this is not something that I practice, but I will learn. I've done it before, but I haven't done it recently. Go for it, Jen. Walk me through it.
All right, do me a favor. Go ahead and go second mode to quit out of where you are.
Will do.
Let's hit that math button again.
I love doing math.
And going over to probability.
Is that where you solve problems?
Probability is usually a problem for most students, so it's an easy find.
I feel you on that.
See where it says random int. That's my random integer. And go ahead and hit the enter button.
My favorite button that I always forget to push.
Yes, exactly. So what is the lowest number? Let's type in the number 1. Okay, and the largest number, the number 50.
Oh, I was going to go with 19 because it's my birthday.
Perfect.
And since I'm typing, I get to decide.
Now, for the letter N, I want you to decide how many random numbers from 1 to 19 you would like to calculate.
I would like 3 random numbers because there's 3 of us on this call.
All right, and let's go down and hit enter on paste.
Enter.
And now hit enter again.
That button always gets me, man.
And so now those are 3 random integers between the numbers 1 and 19, assuming we're picking 3 random integers.
And Jen, I noticed that 18 is repeated in here, which is kind of cool. I was hoping that we would get a repeat there. So notice the random integer feature here is showing drawing a random number between 1 and 19 with replacement. There is one that generates random digits without replacement. You can also get that one as well. But we don't have to necessarily do a demonstration of that unless somebody sees it in the chat and wants to have that. Okay, one other question for you, and I think...
Was it the dot plot question?
So there was the dot plot question, and I want to make sure, Jen, that you have plenty of time to talk about dot plots on the Nspire. But on 84, there is not currently a way to do a dot plot unless you write a program to do that, and that becomes a little bit of a challenge.
Randy, hit histogram for us. There you go.
There you go.
I have to hit enter. I always forget I have to hit enter. Okay.
And then
you can do a histogram, which is really nice.
Can we do a histogram with L3?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to go to zoom and then zoom stat.
There you go. So
And then I'm gonna go to trace.
yes. So that will be as close to a dot plot as we could probably do without having to download your own program or create your own app for it. Because as you trace over, you see how it says n equals 1? That's how many are in that bin, which is very similar to the concept of a dot plot where the dots are in a specific bin and there are a number of dots going up vertically. So that would be my workaround if you can't physically see a dot plot on the 84.
Perfect. I got one more thing, and actually I'm going to share my screen.
All right. Let me know.
And so just give me just 1 second here. We had one question, which was about where we can download apps for the graphing calculators and things like that. So just really briefly, I want to point out what TI has done. We've put out
Are you ready for me to stop sharing, Kurt?
website. Oh yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
Sorry.
All yours, buddy.
All right. So on our homepage, we've got our COVID support is out there right away. And if you click on the download now, you go to a web page where you can see our available resources. And I believe this is also going to be put in the chat right away. So you can see the link for that in the chat. In the comments section there. So you can download the TI-Nspire software or the TI-84 Smart View for the 84 plus CE graphing calculator. You can click on either one of those, give us your email address. We aren't using it for anything other than to send you a license code for that. And it's a 6-month license code. So you can get any one of those softwares on your calculators or on your computers rather for free during this time. Also, I want to point out the TI-Nspire for iPad app is free until the end of May. And the cool thing about that is if you download that on your iPads, it's yours. It never expires. It's not a license that goes away or anything like that. So it will, as long as we support that app, you'll be able to have access to that. And finally, if you've got Chromebooks, there's also a solution for you. You can complete a form. We need a little more information for you to be able to get a beta version of this 84 plus CE for Chromebooks app. So just want to make sure that I pointed that stuff out there. And then we can go on to Jen. If you're ready to go, I will stop sharing my screen and you can.
All right, let me pull up.
Take that.
I got that and share. All right. And just verifying, you guys can see my calculator screen?
Yep, it's super tiny though.
Okay, can you see it in full mode now?
No, the calculator screen is really tiny.
So I saw there were some questions specifically on simulations and activities and apps to things that you can download. If that's something that your goal is, I highly recommend using the Nspire software, as their activities tend to be a bit more robust, as well as the simulations that we can do for both experimental design as well as hypothesis testing and things like that. And I am going to go over one of them. It's going to be the meaning of alpha, which is really big for us this year, considering there isn't any multiple choice, which means our students have to not necessarily be able to calculate their p-value. They will probably be given their p-value, but they're going to have to know what it means and what it means in terms of their rejection region. So let's just go over this basic user interface, especially because a lot of students might be used to a handheld. And so there's some different functionality here. I've purposely made my screen really small to just show off the zoom to your window feature. So if I click on this box, that'll automatically creates the largest possible based on how big my window screen is. Just like in the 84, I can pull this over and make my keypad larger. And the nice thing about the computer software is the ability to insert a new page quickly without having to push too many buttons. So up at the top where this insert is, I can immediately start with a list and spreadsheet. Now, as much as we love all of these pages equally, I know as a stats teacher, my bread and butter, my meat and potatoes is the list and spreadsheet and the data and statistics. So we're going to focus mainly on these two. And so I have some data ready to go and some different ways I can display things. So here I have some freshman and sophomore data. And there's not too much of it, but there is some here. But I'm noticing as a teacher or as a student, I can't see my full list, but I would like to see more of it. So over here on the top right where it says document preview, I don't have to look at it as if I'm holding a handheld. I can change this to the computer view and notice my spreadsheet automatically starts showing me more data. The great thing about using the software is the ability to change the size of my columns a lot easier, as well as if I wanted to repeat a number and highlight it just like I'm in an Excel spreadsheet, being able to grab this corner and drag is much easier with a mouse than if you were to try to use the mouse pad over here in the touch area. So just some great features to point out about using the online software while you're home. Over here, my menu keys when I need them. And even better is the multiple window display. I couldn't imagine trying to flip-flop back and forth to see my data, especially when you've got 15 to 20 minutes to get all of this work done. And our goal isn't the ability to use our calculator, but to use it wisely when you want to look at data differently. And so if I'm going to be over here on my data and statistics page, and I can hover over and look at my Q3 and Q1 and my outlier, but what if I wanted to compare my box plots, which is typically what happens when you are looking at data, especially that beginning question part. So with my mouse key, if I hover over and I right click, notice I can add another variable. And when I click on this, I can choose to add now my sophomores to the same one. And now I can see that comparison side by side. So when you're talking about comparing your data, which one is larger, which one is smaller, being able to see both of them back to back is really helpful. Now imagine practicing by going over to your list and spreadsheet and changing a number like that number 9. I'm going to change it to the number 4 and hit enter. And notice it automatically in live time changes my box plot. Now notice I can now play with these numbers and be able to have that discussion of, okay, what happens to my box plot as my numbers change? What's happening to my IQR? What's happening to those outliers? Are things being changed as a number changes? And one of the big questions children, stat students typically get asked is, if a new number is introduced to this list, what happens to the center? What happens to that average? And so being able to come down here and add an additional number to see what happens to that average is fantastic and what it does to that box plot. So some things to keep in mind. So if I'm going through here and I decide that I want to add a calculator page, I can insert a new problem and it won't affect any of my previous data. And say I want to add a calculator. And I want to be able to use my templates and I want to be able to do my probability. There's a couple options for you. Up at the top, I do have a template area. So if you want to use your matrices, you're more than welcome to do that here. I also have the ability to go to my menu button and go straight to probability to find things like my random integer, my random sample, my random number. Now keep in mind, number includes decimals from 0 to 1, as opposed to integer is whole numbers kind of thing. So keep that in mind, as well as your different distributions. Now, well, stats is not about calculating the number. It's about understanding the concept. And so what I really enjoy about the TI website, and I'm just going to pull this up because this is where I got it, is that under their activities and Math-Inspired, they have stuff specific to statistics.
And you're not sharing the screen, you're sharing the calculator.
I am not. I'm going to fix that because I am a smart person. And I'm going to go share, screen, share. Am I good now?
You are good now. I see the meaning of alpha.
Beautiful. So up here in activities and Math-Inspired takes me right here to statistics and hypothesis testing. And the big thing for students is understanding things like power and alpha and p-value and what that means in context. And so even if your students were to download this without you, how would they know what to do with the activity? Well, I've downloaded the student activity PDF as well as the doc. And when I'm looking at this, it will show me how to walk through this activity to make those discoveries, even if my teacher is not there with me. If I really need more help with alpha, I can get that. So what I really enjoyed about this specific activity is that here, notice that I'm taking a sample size of 5, and I can see exactly where all 5 of those samples landed within my data, on top of the fact that it will give me the sample average. So not only can I continue drawing and see what happens, I can now start making those descriptions of what is actually happening every time I get a new sample of 5. The second screen is the exact same one as above, but they've added in that alpha, and they did an alpha region of 10%. And as you know, depending on the context of the problem, your alpha could be 5%, 10%, or something that makes sense based on the context. And I can see that when I draw my sample of 5, does it land in that region? And what does that mean? And so if I go down here, the power of this one is allowing me to change my alpha. And that discussion as my alpha increases, what is that doing to my region? And does that mean that I'm more likely, less likely to have a probability of falling into that region? And if you wanted to see that bigger, they've done that for you. And in fact, what's amazing, as you can see, the more of the samples that I draw, the more that ends up falling in that region. And so you're going to be able to have those discussions. You can practice this with or without your teacher to help you get that better, deep understanding of concepts you're probably going to have to describe in words on that AP exam. And so where I found those things again is on the TI website. Over here, when I click on activities, I go to Math Inspired, and notice when I click on hypothesis testing, I have lots of options, the meaning of alpha, the meaning of power. And I noticed that someone had asked a question specifically about sampling and experimentation. And so being able to go over things like blocking and random samples and stratified sampling are really powerful when they have to understand the meaning of it, when they may not actually have to physically do the calculation this year. And so that's kind of what I wanted to show off, Kurt. Is there anything that popped up that we want to go over?
Yeah, there's actually another thing, a little bit more about sampling distributions that might be of some interest. And if you want to, I can share my screen.
Definitely. I'm ready to stop.
And we will kind of play a little bit for just a moment. So give me just 1 second and I'll share my screen. And we've got a final question out here for some more questions. So just let me know if anything comes in. But I thought maybe I would demonstrate just one more thing. So I've pulled some data from the CDC yesterday afternoon, COVID cases. I figured while we were doing this, I saw somebody ask this question, so I pulled this stuff up. So I just grabbed a little bit of data. It's the number of cases of COVID in each state and or territory of the United States. So I think there's 60 or 70 data points in here. And then I've got some other stuff here, but the person who asked about how do we maybe create a sampling distribution or show students how to do simulations of that. We can actually do that in the list and spreadsheet and then build a sampling distribution over here on this other page. So I might name this, I don't know, we'll call it SAMP. Is that good enough? We could call it sample means or something else like that. But what is kind of cool is inside of each of these cells, we can create a formula for taking the random sample. That should be randsamp, which is a mean or a function that takes a random sample from a list. So maybe I'll look at the list cases and I'll take, say, 3 states at a time. And either with or without replacement, you can put a 0 or a 1, depending. I'll say without replacement, which is the 1. And I'll paste that in there. So what I've got there is the mean of 3 samples or 3 possible states. I've pulled all those together, taken the mean and done that, which is really cool. I've got 1, but we want a distribution, right? So just like in Microsoft Excel or some of these other spreadsheet programs, you can highlight the bottom corner of that and fill as many of these as you like, many of these times as you want. I don't know, maybe I'll do that 39 times. That seemed like a reasonable number. So now I've taken that sample of size 3, calculated its mean 39 times. What I can now do on this page, I can actually look at that sampling distribution that I just built on that previous page, which is really kind of cool. And I can continue to add to it if I like to. I could do that and continue to add to that at 39. Fill that for as many more as I wanted to. And that's reflected pretty quickly. Just one more way that you can do and maybe make investigations and look at sampling distributions. You can see already it's starting to kind of level out a little bit there. So maybe if I took samples of a larger size, maybe I would get something that looked a little bit different.
Well, Kurt, as you know, in stats, you should definitely have sample sizes in the double digits for sure.
Oh,
so
I should have done
that sample size of 3 is probably what's causing that right skew on you.
Oh, of course.
But that's one of the really nice things about the dynamic nature of what you're doing. You can change it real quick.
Size 30.
You knew right away there's something that wasn't quite right going on.
Maybe if I do samples of size 30, I'll get something, except I need to replace all of these, and I don't know how many. There's 66 of them. Samples of size 30. Takes a little bit of time. Now I've got them. Whoa, look at that. They all piled up right around the mean. Or you could do all kinds of really fun stuff with showing that mean like that. That would be kind of a cool.
There's actually a really
somebody asked me to increase the sample size to 30, which I did. And
stats people like the 3s.
Well, you know, while we're playing with this, let's just keep playing with this.
You know what? You could do a really great one with dice. So I've got one right here where it's the summation for the faces on a 6-sided die, and you've got 2 dice, and so you roll it and you get that beautiful normal distribution when you take enough samples.
Look at that. All of those centered right around cases. So Jen, have you got one you want to share here?
Yeah, it's actually one that I stole from another colleague at TI, which is pretty cool, using a notes page. And so let's go share screen.
Go to it.
And I
that
actually
notes page is some really powerful stuff.
It does. So I actually got this at a T3 conference, and we actually built it in the session, which was amazing. And so this is just a notes page. And just like what you did, there was a list talking about the faces being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so there are 2 of them. And when we find the sum of the faces, so they set it up in the notes page. And then if you come over here and notice, it turned into this beautiful normal distribution, which was really nice. And so there was another one that I stole, which was looking how as the degrees of freedom change, your T distribution turns more into a normal distribution, which is really neat. And so being able to look at the coin, being able to do your random integer from 0 to 1 100 times, and being able to look at that and put it into your chart is huge. So yeah, just fun. And I gotta be honest with you, when it comes to the Nspire, as a teacher, the best thing you can do for yourself is to play and practice before sending this out to students, because I can't tell you how many times I've started building with them in class and it turns out terrible. So use this time at home to build it first and play and make sure it works, and then send it out for them to play with, and they will definitely find all those bugs and issues for you.
So Jen, I want Peter, somebody brag. I'm sure I missaid that. But I want to share he asked one more question around that. And so I changed the scale on my,
yes,
a moment ago. And it turns out that even with samples of size 30, that is so skewed, we get this really odd thing happening with almost a binomial distribution. Some of those that include that New York data are over here, and the rest of them that don't include that New York data are over here. So that's really kind of interesting. Even with that 1 or 2 really weird outliers, samples of size 30 didn't quite get us where we were expecting. Perhaps if we continued taking a lot more of those, we might have gotten a little bit closer to a normal distribution. But it's very interesting. Maybe we need a samples of size 40 or something like that to kind of overcome.
And keeping in mind, the focus of this year's AP exam isn't going to be actually doing the calculations. It's going to be, given this information, what can you say about it? And if you were to add in something new, if you were to take something out, how would it change? And so even if your kids are just manipulating something they're creating on their own, if they can be able to describe what's happening with the removal or the addition of a new data piece, that's going to be your biggest bang for the buck. And so that's where I would definitely spend the time.
That's a really good point. Really good tip. Well, it doesn't look like we've gotten any more questions or comments in here on the chat. So I think we're probably good to wrap up. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and just want to say one more time how much I appreciate you, Jen, and Randy, for taking the time to hang out with us this afternoon and share your thoughts and some expertise. Yeah, Greg says so much for the central limit theorem. I agree. It's
you stats people crack
those
me up.
approximations and assumptions. Sometimes you can find ways to break them. That's the first time I've ever seen one that was skewed enough to really cause that issue. But anyway. It's interesting that happened. Anyway, I just really appreciate you guys for hanging out with us this afternoon. Again, teachers, I so much appreciate what you guys are doing and the hard work you're doing. Your students will be better for it. I certainly wish you luck on the AP exams in a couple of weeks here. And yeah, so we'll sign off and have a good evening.